Hello, everyone. Welcome to part 3. Welcome to Wednesday of week 11. We're going to dive right in and think about just for a moment where we've been. Through the course of part 1, thinking about Earth as home, Earth as our larger body, Earth as the place that we share. Or that others share with us. And then moving into part 2, where we were assessing the health of this place, of home. And so now we're moving into part 3. What are we going to do about it? How will we respond? How are we going to work toward healing ourselves and healing home? Creating more connection and less separation. And really, the idea is about awareness. So take a moment to really take in the image that's there on the screen. The idea that we have impact every moment of every day. We have impact. The way that we choose to impact, there is a power of choice in the way that we choose to impact the way we think about ourselves, the way we think about each other, the way we think about Earth. We have that power of choice, which is huge. And so as we become aware, as we learn and unlearn and continue that cycle, we have capacity as we gain awareness to make different choices. And so I understand that some of you are feeling really that this is a lot of doom and gloom, and some of you are feeling empowered to do things. So we're all over the board with over 500 people doing this course right now. There's a lot of range of what people are feeling and thinking and doing and knowing. And so for those who are feeling that helplessness, I'd like to talk a little bit more. I introduced this a few weeks back, but when people feel helpless, they perceive that no matter how hard they try, nothing's going to alter the bad situation. They tend to give up, just accept their fate, and fall into a state of inaction. And in this, if you've studied any psychology, this can be a real game stopper when it comes to solving problems. It can lead to depression and to anxiety and a lowered sense of self. And so that's not where we want to be. We are able to find, or we may be experiencing this learned helplessness for a lot of different reasons. For example, if a child is unable to solve math problems, and different teachers work with this child, and the child still can't do those math problems, there could be a feeling of helplessness. The flip side is, hey, I'm not good at math, so I'll do other stuff. I'm going to emphasize my strengths. So learned helplessness could come from that kind of situation where you've tried and tried and tried, and you don't know what else to do, how else to get over this huge hump. Or it could go like this. It could be a conversation between an influential adult and a child. And after the child sees something that upsets them, when I was a kid, there were commercials about starving children, commercials about war on TV, or animal abuse, or people abuse, or climate issues of today. Children, when they see that stuff and they come to an adult with their concerns, it could be that adult says something like, "Oh, sweetheart, there's nothing that we can do about that. and then there's the learned helplessness. It comes out right then. Or the the intention of that adult is good, trying to protect that child from heartbreak. But a phrase like this can be downright devastating as far as learning helplessness. It could also be phrases like, "Oh, you're too sensitive. Oh, you're too emotional. You think too much." And I'm sharing this experience because it's mine. "Oh, honey, there's nothing that we can do about that. That's too big for, oh, you just feel too much. Just let some of that." And it's taken me a long time to see that that's not true. I've been able to flip it. I've been able to unlearn my helplessness in a lot of cases. And so just being aware that this could come from a lot of different places, and that it can become a personality trait. It's sometimes so deeply subconscious that we don't even know that it's there. It could be those stories that we carry so far deep inside of us. And so that climate change, global warming, all of the issues that we've talked about, there's a lot of ways that we can address that. The idea that there's conservation practices. I mean, we've talked about recycling glass and metal, particularly choosing different ways of purchasing things, cutting back on energy use. And sometimes people still think that these things are ineffective because they seem so small. And it becomes this moral entanglement. And yet, there is possibility. The EPA states for certain that small behavioral changes could eliminate a lot of the emissions that we're putting out. It could change things on a scale that is, if every American household were to recycle glass and metal, if we were to shift our purchasing process, there's all this stuff that we could do. And the EPA is acknowledging that small changes help. So, what is it that we can take on? How can we do it? And then, how can we spread that message to other people? I've already heard that some of you are doing that in really beautiful ways with your roommates and with your families. And so you're already doing some of it. And so that is breaking free of this learned helplessness, the idea that we can make change. So today we're going to dive in particularly to part 3, starting with food. It's actually one of my favorite things to think about. I really enjoy food. I enjoy good food. And so I want you to think back to your ecological footprint. About 1/3 of what we do with related to food, and it can sometimes even be more than that, is are related to what we eat. So what we didn't dive into that much with the ecological footprint is how you get to those choices. So right now, as I think about my food story, I think about it could be the conscious, again, the conscious stuff and the subconscious stuff. So my family history, thinking about what I was served at home, what I'm comfortable with because I'm familiar with that. It could be cultural traditions. For me, I didn't come from a strong cultural background. There were some Swedish foods that we ate, but generally only at Christmas time. And so my family history, what I'm familiar with, comfortable with, that's definitely part of my food story. I have a lot of food sensitivities. So I have food allergies that are directly, I mentioned this during the stress class. My food sensitivities are directly related to the stress that I have put on my body. And so my body has stopped digesting some things. So that's part of my story. My current family situation, I have 3 sons who all eat very different things. They all like very different things. I helped my dad in the garden, so we ate some food from our garden. My great grandma was known for her baking. And I often attribute to how much I love to bake to my great grandma and that the stories that I heard of her. Um, Growing my own vegetables sometimes has been really fruitful, actually, with fruit, but then also some greens and things like that. But it's not a strong suit. It's something that I'm trying to get better at. A CSA farm share, being part of a community supported agriculture. Also thinking about portion of my budget, how much money do I want to spend on food? And then also the idea that I here in State College, and the fact that I have a car gives me access to farmers markets, to grocery stores, to food very readily. So that all plays into my food story. So thinking about where you are and what you eat right now, I'd like you to sort of break that down for yourself. What influences the food that you eat? So take a couple minutes in your group. If you need to write some things down, cool. If you want to throw some things in the Zoom chat, but have a little conversation about this. Imagine that many of you are subject to whatever they're feeding you from the dining halls. And I totally get that. So as we go through this class, thinking about food choices, some things you'll be able to consider now in your life, and some things will be for later. And that's okay. It's a matter of just doing what we can when we can. So I want to dive into what is food. We have never had so much diversity of foods available to us now. We've never had more harmful foods, and we've never had everything in such abundance. In the grocery store, as late as the 1990s, there were about 7,000 different products available in the grocery store. Now, to walk into one of our, even right here in town, one of our grocery stores, Giant or Weis, Wegmans, there's somewhere between 40 and 50,000 different items available in the grocery store. So in the next few minutes, we're going to analyze some of the current food choices to see what we can learn. But we're going to approach it from a few different angles. And so first, we're going to dive into the story of one food particularly. We're going to look at potatoes first. So here we go, backyard potatoes. These are potatoes that were grown in somebody's backyard garden. And in order to grow backyard potatoes, you take an old potato and the eyes that are on the potato, I have some that are sprouting right here on my counter. And so what I would do is just put those in the ground and they would sprout more potatoes. So you use potatoes to grow potatoes. So it's not a lot of energy that's going in if you're planting them in your backyard. Let's think about it as 1 kilocalorie of energy in, and you're getting 20 kilocalories out. And so you're multiplying your energy by 20 times. That's pretty cool. So that's backyard potatoes. And then if you have store-bought potatoes, they're similar, except they have had a longer journey. And so for these, though, we're putting 5 calories of energy in, and we're getting 1 calorie of energy out. Okay, so a flip in the energy. French fries, I do have to admit that I really like good French fries. Um, but as far as the energy, the balance, 10 calories of energy in, and 1 calorie out. So we're getting further on that scale to the side. And then when we talk about potato chips, we've got 20 calories in and 1 calorie out. So what is happening along the way as these become more and more, well, unlike potatoes, the further we get? What's increasing the energy in? We have to think about the idea that for large scale farming, so if we're talking about those store bought potatoes, this is a potato planter. So we have the growing techniques, we have the machines that are planting, we are having the machines then that harvest the potatoes. We have machines that are applying the herbicides and the pesticides and the fertilizer. And then we also have the machines that are running the irrigation. And so the things that they all have in common, that energy that's going in is increasing on each level because they are getting more and more processed. So the difference between just store-bought potatoes, they're just potatoes. So they've gone through this process, but then they haven't been further processed. They haven't gone through the cutting of the chips or the French fries. They haven't gone through the packaging in that same way. And in all cases, then there's also transportation costs. And so those calories that are going into those other potatoes that don't come from the backyard are the difference is how much oil, how much fossil fuel, how much energy is going into to process those potatoes. So all these steps, what they have in common is fossil fuel. And then what's your return on investment? I know there are a lot of economics or supply chain majors in this class. What's the return on investment? That's pretty important. And so what happens then is we look at a chart like this. Homegrown potatoes cost practically nothing. I mean, you take one old rotting potato, drying up potato, and you cut it up and put it in the ground and it makes more potatoes. That's pretty much nothing. You have the energy that you personally would, take walking to and from the garden. It would take the energy to water, but that's kind of it. Oh, harvesting, that's important. And then the store-bought fresh potatoes, about 40 cents a pound, and then on up to potato chips or Pringles that are costing a whole lot more per pound because of all the processing that has gone in. And the idea is that we've gone from a food item, potatoes, to a food-like item. This phrase, food-like substances, comes from Michael Pollan. He is a well-known food writer. So thinking about how much processing, how much energy goes in, how much oil is put into them, and how much packaging there is what creates then the food-like substance. Extra processing leads to less nutrition. A tip that I learned a few years back is that if you shop the edges of the grocery store and avoid the aisles, then you're going to find more real food. And there is, the aisles contain a lot of the packaged, prepackaged, processed food-like substances. So the edges of the grocery store, where you find the produce and the dairy and the meat. That's a cool trick. But yet not everybody has access to these large grocery stores. There are food deserts. This is a real issue in the United States. 2.1 million households do not own a vehicle and live more than a mile from the nearest grocery store. They have access to more fast foods in those areas where people don't have, it's where the poorest economic status. Low income zip codes have 30% more convenience stores, which don't carry real food. And there could be a real market for a large retail grocery store that would help in these food deserts. But the idea is that that people don't have access in a lot of cases to fresh food. What you eat and how much you eat can have a real huge impact on your long-term health. Healthy eating habits are important to prevent so many different ailments, which is why people are encouraged. Health officials have, for decades, have been discouraging us from eating the processed foods. But so for so many people, it's not that simple. So these food deserts is a real growing issue in the United States, particularly during the pandemic. It has just gotten worse. A way to think about, or a story from my food tradition, I have a routine when I can put it together, when I can manage it. I was thinking about my ritual of some cookies and a cup of coffee. So this ritual started with my grandpa, and I adore my grandpa. He was my best friend. Every day at 2 o'clock, grandpa would come in from work and have cookies and coffee. And so every time I got the chance to hang out with him at 2 o'clock, we would have coffee and cookies. And I was thinking about what this ritual really contains for me. So today I have some ginger cookies. And in those ginger cookies, I have butter from the cows, obviously, sugar from Brazil, so sugar cane that has been harvested, milled, refined, and this is unbleached, but some people get the bleached kind. There's molasses, also from Brazil. It's actually a byproduct of the sugar purifying process. There's eggs coming from chickens, and vanilla grown in Madagascar off the coast of Africa. And those vanilla beans are then soaked in vodka, which is a distillation of cereal grains or potatoes that have been fermented. And then the baking soda, which was man-made with a chemical reaction, or it could have been mined in Colorado. There's flour, so that was the wheat that was ground the berries from the wheat plant, added small amounts of bleaching agent and oxidizing agents to make it white, so that I guess that makes it more appealing. Vitamins and minerals are added as required by law to produce enriched flour. The ginger is grown in India, China, or Nigeria, and the root of the ginger plant is ground up to be what's in my cookies. Cinnamon that's grown in Indonesia or China. Spice is made from the bark of the cinnamon tree. And then salt, which is mined or produced by the evaporation of seawater. And then my coffee, this particular coffee came from Honduras. It's an acquaintance of my brother who grew this on his farm. Coffee plants are cultivated now in 70 countries around the world. And of course, the coffee berries are picked and processed and dried. And then the dried coffee seeds are referred to as beans, are then shipped, in this case, to the roaster. And they're roasted. And then I took those roasted beans, ground them, brewed them with near boiling water, and I made this. And of course, in there is, I sweeten my coffee with maple syrup, which is local to Pennsylvania, and it has oat milk, which is the soaked oats. Um, so just in this snack that I have, how many miles did these ingredients travel? Thinking about just some cookies and some coffee. How many people were involved in my treat? How many processes did these ingredients go through? It's relatively astounding when you think about it. Ingredients from all over the globe, but and on any day I can walk into the grocery store and I can buy a container of ginger or cinnamon or vanilla, and it's come from all over the world to make that happen. So I want you now to think about your favorite food. I do love cookies. Think about your favorite food though, and speculate about the processes that your food went through to get to you. Share that with your group. Think that out loud for a little bit. This might be something that you continue to think about the stories of your food as you go through your days. Um, so on to the next part, the next consideration. What about meat? This class would be very thorough to talk about food if we didn't dive in to the conversation of meat. Eating meat was a topic specifically of your eco footprint because it uses loads of resources, energy, land, and water. So I'm going to show a video, and it's pretty graphic, about the idea that about how animals are treated in the large scale meat production process. And so if you need to look away, please do so, but come back in 5 minutes so that we can continue on. 8.6 billion chickens, 33.2 million cattle, 239.4 million turkeys, 2.3 million sheep and lambs, 12 million pigs, Americans are set to eat more meat this year than ever before. So, what is meat doing to the earth? Why does it increase our footprint so significantly? Well, the first step is water use. Um, water, it water, water. Um, the bigger the animal, the more water it takes, obviously, and so um, the planet faces some growing water constraints as our freshwater reservoirs and aquifers dry up, particularly in the western United States. Water pollution is a whole nother factor. Um, so there's the pollution that comes from the animals themselves, uh, but it's also worth remembering that 1/3 of the grain grown in our country is is used to raise these animals. So it's not just the animals that are taking or contributing to the water pollution. It's also the herbicides and the pesticides that are being used on the crops that feed these animals. Um, Land use and deforestation. Livestock is is the world's largest user of land resources, with grazing land and cropland representing almost 80% of all agricultural land. So that's the feed crops and the pastures. All right, I've heard that I'm back. So, talking about, I don't know what you all just heard, but just thinking about the idea that water use is really high. The bigger the animal, the more water use it takes, the more water it takes to grow those crops. And so the water pollution is another issue. The idea that 1/3 of the grain that we're growing in this country is fed to livestock, fed to animals, and those water pollutions are from the nutrients, the poop from the cows or the chickens or the hogs, whatever it is, the pesticides, the sediment that's being pushed into the streams, um, the pesticides, the herbicides, the pathogens, that would be the E. coli from these animals that's getting spread, as well as emerging pollutants, things like the drug residues, things that these animals are being drugged to keep them healthy. And those drugs are then being put into the water at the expense of other species. So livestock is also the world's largest user of land resources. So land use and deforestation related to growing these kind of animals. Grazing land and cropland is represents almost 80% of all agricultural land, feed crops and pastures. And then climate change. It's certainly hard to work out exactly what quantity of greenhouse gases are being emitted by the meat industry from farm to fork. The idea that it takes 284 gallons of oil to raise a cow, processing, packing, shipping, storing, refrigeration, and then when we get them home, the energy that it takes to refrigerate and to cook. The average American consumes 209 pounds of meat every year, um, and that's a lot when you multiply that times our population. So if you're producing one hamburger, a quarter pounder, it uses about the same amount of fossil fuels as driving your car 20 miles. And so that would make a total of 80 miles for 1 pound of meat. So to put that in context, then the American meat consumer expends the same amount of fossil fuels annually eating meat as they would if they drove 16,720 miles. It's across the country 6 times. It's a lot of energy. So this is a challenge, an issue. Food waste in the United States is excessive. 40% of all the food produced in the US is wasted, costing $161 billion. Food makes up 20% of the landfill weight. That's pretty crazy. Wasting $1,500 for a family of 4. And the methane released by this food as it breaks down is a greenhouse gas that's more powerful than carbon dioxide. So even after all the energy that's put into producing this food that comes to us, then we face this issue of food waste. The underlying resources behind this, it's 2.6 of all US greenhouse gases emissions annually, 20%, 21% of water usage, farming fertilizer, et cetera, et cetera. So food waste is a really big concern. But the flip side of this is if we could divert 15% of the food that goes to waste, that would be enough to cut the food insecure Americans in half. Food waste could be being composted into a sustainable soil or being used to generate electricity. And then encouraging places to purchase the ugly produce, the ones that apple has an extra bump, or that squash is absolutely huge. That if we were able to sell that stuff, then there would be ways to cut down on food waste. So this is a really big challenge. So let's be aware. What's another story? There are some movements. First, there's the local food movements. So people that eat only local foods, they're locavores. That aims to connect the food producers and food consumers in the same geographic region so that those farmers can be self-reliant and improve their food network with the people that are right in their community. And yet, that's not the way it works so much of the time. For a long time, the prevailing mantra of farming in America has been go big or get out. This kind of farming, this is what's happening in some places around this country. Those giant fields of corn, of soybeans. The story traces its roots back to, his name was Earl Butz. He worked with President Nixon as the US Secretary of Agriculture, and he held that position for 5 years. Domestic farm policies shifted to favor the large industrial operations and shun the smaller farms that favored organic, locally sold crops. And so this is the story. We've talked about these persistent stories. This is one that's continuing to today. And it has also led to dwindling crop diversity, massive environmental footprint, degraded soil, excessive water use, and heavy use of pesticides and herbicides. This isn't the way plants like to be grown. It's not the healthiest way to grow them. And yet there are alternatives that continue to thrive, even though this isn't our cultural story. So there's organic food movements. Organic is the idea that they're using fertilizer, they're using compost, they're using those nutrients that we've talked about, recycled nutrients, that they're not using any chemicals. So organic is one way to go. And I realize that this is not accessible to everyone. This is not accessible to all of you. And yet, maybe someday, the idea that knowing about it can be helpful. What is accessible to you is the downtown farmers market that happens every Friday. And the farmers market, sociologists have counted conversations and have found there are more person-to-person connections that happen at farmers markets than at grocery stores. These kind of interactions with the farm, between the person growing the food and the person buying the food. So there's direct connection. It's contributing to the local economy. There's less oil input, and there's the awareness and choice by farmers to live lighter on the land. I mentioned earlier about community supported art agriculture. There are several of these around State College. If you're going to be here for the summer, you might want to look into this. You work for 3 or 4 hours a week and you take home this big box of produce that came from the land that you worked on. It's a pretty cool system. If you want to be connected with one of those farms, you let me know and I will help you connect. And another huge opportunity for you is the Penn State Student Farm. The contact for the student farm is listed here on the slide, Leslie Pillen. And please contact her if you are at all interested in volunteering or having your own plot, or just seeing what it's all about. The student farm at Penn State. Pretty great. You don't have to be part of the sustainable food systems major. Just go and hang out, play in the dirt and grow stuff. You can also be a willing worker on organic farm anywhere in the world. These happen, obviously in the United States, happening in Canada and Romania, France, Italy, Portugal. So anywhere in the world you can travel and be part of farms and get all kinds of cultural experiences. Turns out that getting in the garden and getting dirty is really good. It's really good for us. It's a natural antidepressant due to the unique microbes in that healthy organic soil. It can make you happier and healthier to be in the dirt. It's verifiable by science. There's a microbacterium that has been found to mirror the effect on neurons in the brain that would be like having Prozac, except without the side effects. The way it works is the happy microbes in the soil get your chemicals, the good chemicals, to rise, which leads to the production of more serotonin. So serotonin has, lack of serotonin is connected to depression, anxiety, OCD, and bipolar disorders. So get out there and get dirty and grow some stuff. It's pretty exciting. So all this talk, what can we do today? What can we be starting in this very moment? We can start thinking about reducing food waste. We can start thinking about the story of where our food comes from and making choices about maybe purchasing more local food. We can moderate our lust for meat, adopting something more traditional. They say that like the Mediterranean diet. So I looked up what that is. Vegetables, fruits, nuts, seeds, legumes, potatoes, whole grains, breads, herbs, spices, fish, seafood, although those are challenges that we've talked about. Extra virgin olive oil, then things to eat in moderation, the poultry and the eggs and the cheese and the yogurt. So those are, there are things that we can act on in this very moment. And then there are things that we can do in the long run. Increase the supply of food coming from each farm by growing in more sustainable ways. We could shift the whole story. Don't you find it odd that people will put more work into choosing their mechanic or house contractor than they will into choosing the person who grows their food? Being more aware. And the very last point I want to make is we all eat, and it would be a sad waste of opportunity to eat badly. The idea of eating healthier, eating together, means eating happier. Food brings us together. It's community. I know that it's my student, I had a student write about this in Packback. I think it's so lovely that the idea that we can be together, and being together makes us happier. And when we're sharing food, it actually increases social bonding and feelings of well-being, enhances a sense of contentedness and being embedded in the community, sharing food together. And so with that, here's your pack back question. What is your response to all of this? How might you act on your gut feelings? And will you? Thanks for being with me today. I look forward to seeing some of you in lab on Friday and the others of you on Monday. Have a lovely day.